Somewhere in Afghanistan, a JTAC is watching Taliban fighters mass in the open, and he is already talking to the sky. Two weapons are about to answer at the same time, one firing from the dirt, one from 30,000 feet, and what happens next was captured on footage that was never supposed to leave the classified archive. 5 engagements. Ground guns fixing the target, F-16s finishing what the machine guns start. What you are about to witness is the most devastating combined arms destruction ever ranked by body count. F-16 and M24B tearing apart waves of Taliban fighters who never saw either coming July 2008, Farah Province, Afghanistan. 80 Taliban fighters are moving in the open, spread across a dry riverbed, convinced no aircraft is overhead and no American position is close enough to matter. They are wrong on both counts. The M240B teams open up first. Long bursts, controlled sectors, 7.62 rounds cutting across open ground at 950 rounds per minute. The Taliban do exactly what untrained fighters do. Under unexpected machine gun fire, they compress. They push together, tightening into a denser mass. They just made the JTAC's job easier. The gun teams hold their sectors, keep the formation fixed, and burn. The F-16s are already overhead. Gustafson's gun is screaming. Lance CPL. Brady Gustafson walks his fire left to right across the riverbed, reading the ground the way a trained gunner does. The Taliban formation is pinned. They can't push forward and pull back without stepping into the beaten zone. Then the barrel overheats. Barrel change. 6 seconds. The gun is back up before the enemy finds a seam. Every second, Gustafson keeps that formation compressed and stationary is another second. The JTAC is tightening coordinates. The Taliban fighters are still trying to orient, still searching for cover that doesn't exist in an open riverbed. Fixed, counted, exactly where the F-16 needs them. The JTAC's voice cuts through the net, flat and precise. Tango, open ground, grid confirmed, cleared hot. The F-16 is already in its run. The pilot, call sign unrecorded in open sources, 77th Fighter Squadron out of Bagram, rolls in steep, nose tracking the riverbed coordinates where Gustafson's gun has been holding the Taliban. The ordnance is a GBU-38, a 500-pound JDAM, inertially guided. It doesn't care about dust or smoke, it cares about the grid. The gun camera footage tells the story in silence first, a white flash, a pressure wave that lifts the riverbed itself. Fighters at the formation center simply cease to exist. Those on the edges are thrown outward, stumbling, disoriented, moving without direction. That movement is a fatal mistake. They've just stepped into the M240's beaten zone. Gustafson is already there. The front wave is broken. Survivors are scattered across open ground with nowhere to consolidate. But the F-16 isn't done. The pilot is already banking hard left, nose coming back around. Bagram clears a second pass. The JTAC on the ground, watching Taliban fighters scatter across open ground, feeds updated coordinates in real time. The F-16 rolls in again, this time the 20mm cannon. Short controlled bursts walking through the riverbed's eastern edge where a secondary group is consolidating behind a low berm. The gun camera footage shows them moving. Then it shows them not moving. A third pass, another JDAM. The second 500-pound impact catches the largest surviving cluster, fighters who pushed north assuming they'd cleared the strike zone. But they hadn't. When Gulf Company's Marines advanced to assess, the count is staggering. Across the full engagement, confirmed Taliban dead approach 250, one valley, and a pilot who stayed on station instead of turning for home. But Farah Province was at least a fight with room to maneuver. What 9 soldiers faced was something else entirely, a position so exposed that when 200 Taliban fighters hit it from every direction at once, there was nowhere to fall back to. July 13, 2008, Wanat Valley, Nuristan Province, 04,020 in the morning. 9 paratroopers from 2nd Platoon, Chosen Company, 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry Regiment, occupy a half-built observation post called OP Topside. Nothing but sandbags, wire, and a handful of crew-served weapons perched on a terraced hillside. 100 meters below sits Combat Outpost Keating, where the rest of their brothers sleep. Up here, it is just 9 men. The darkness is absolute. The valley below is silent. Then, from every ridgeline, treeline, and every approach simultaneously, more than 200 Taliban fighters open fire at once. RPGs detonate inside the wire before anyone finishes reaching for a weapon. Machine gun fire rakes the position from 3 directions. The enemy is close, pouring through gaps in the wire before the Americans can fully orient. 9 men, every direction, no retreat. That is the trap. SGA. Ryan Pitts woke up inside. Pitts is bleeding from both arms and both legs. Shrapnel hit him in the opening seconds. By any medical standard, he should be down. He is not down. Within minutes of the assault, every other man at OP topside is wounded or dead. Pitts is the only one still moving. He crawls between crew-served positions, M240, grenade sumps, firing ports, keeping fire on an enemy already inside the wire. When the M240 runs dry, he throws grenades, one-handed. Both arms torn up, he pulls pins with his teeth and rolls them over the sandbags by feel. Then he gets on the radio and calls his own position as the target for supporting fires. He is asking aircraft to hit the ground he is bleeding on because the alternative is every man at topside dies in the next 2 minutes. The F-16s are already overhead. The JTAC pushes the call. Danger close. Approved. The first F-16 rolls in from the northeast, 20mm cannon, spinning up before the pilot finishes his attack call. The strafing pass hits Taliban fighters already inside the outer wire, rounds impacting less than 50 meters from where Pitts is lying. The ground shakes. Fire from the northern tree line stops. The pilot pulls off, resets, rolls in again. Second pass. Another burst. The western approach collapses. 200 Taliban fighters have been pressing this position for over an hour. The F-16s deny them the final 40 meters. That decision saves topside. The guns go quiet, but the silence is not victory. Not yet. The Taliban pull back before dawn fully breaks. Small groups dragging their dead into the tree line, others abandoning equipment entirely. Post-battle assessment confirms more than 50 Taliban killed, the majority broken by those F-16 strafing runs in the final assault wave. The combined arms sequence was textbook. Pitts' M240 fire fixed the attackers, the F-16s finished them. But 9 Americans died at Wanat that morning. That is the brutal arithmetic of Wanat. A combined arms victory measured against an American catastrophe. The attacking force of 200 plus was decimated. But Nuristan wasn't the only valley where this formula produced devastating results. The Korengal Valley, a 6-mile slash of rock and pine in eastern Afghanistan that American soldiers called the deadliest place on earth. They weren't wrong, but the Taliban who controlled those ridgelines never understood what the terrain was doing to them. The Korengal's steep walls didn't give fighters cover, they gave them direction. Every attack funneled down the same draws, saddles, and the same exposed slopes. Taliban commanders thought they owned the high ground. What they'd actually done was build themselves a kill box with walls. The 73rd Airborne Brigade understood this by mid-2007. Their M240 teams at Firebase Vegas, Restrepo, and Vimoto were positioned not just to defend, but to channel. Force the Taliban into the open, hold them there, call the sky down on top of them. F-16s orbiting overhead completed the equation. The Korengal didn't produce one decisive engagement, it produced the same devastating engagement, repeated and confirmed in body counts. That pattern made it the most lethal combined arms laboratory of the entire Afghan war. The firefights that made the Korengal a graveyard didn't happen by accident. They happened because 1/7/3 machine gun teams executed a deliberate tactic. When Taliban fighters pushed down a draw or crossed a saddle, MT-40 teams at Restrepo and Firebase Vegas opened up immediately. Sustained fire at 650 rounds per minute forced fighters to flatten behind rocks, crawl into gullies, or sprint for the tree line, all of which ran into pre-plotted F-16 strike coordinates. Staff Sergeant Eric Gallardo's team held one such position during a 2007 contact. Burning while his JTAC crouched 10 meters away was already talking an F-16 onto the exact terrain feature where the Taliban had gone to ground. The Taliban thought suppression meant safety. That is the M240's real job in the Korengal, not to finish the fight, but to freeze it until the sky could. When Dodi released the gun camera and ground camera recordings from the Korengal engagements, what viewers saw was clinical. GBU-38, JDAMs hitting ridgeline positions with 500 pounds of precision, detonations blooming white, then debris cascading down slopes where Taliban fighters had gone to ground 30 seconds earlier believing suppression had bought them time. The 20mm strafing runs are worse. The F-16 cuts across the frame, the ground erupts in a line, and nothing behind those rocks is standing anymore. Post-strike assessments produce some of the highest single-sortie confirmed kill counts in the entire Korengal record. That is the Korengal Valley strike. Terrain as kill box, machine guns as the lock, F-116s as the key. But the Korengal was terrain working in America's favor. What happens when the Taliban designs the kill zone themselves and lures a Green Beret team directly into it? January 2016, Nangarhar Province. The tip came through a local intermediary. A Taliban commander wanted to defect. He had names, positions, weapons caches. Capt. Ryan Westbrook's 12-man detachment from 3rd Special Forces Group moved toward the village outside Jalalabad before first light, confident in the intelligence. The Taliban commander had been planning this for weeks. The kill zone was already wired when the team stepped into the alley. PKM teams in the tree line, RPG gunners on rooftops, IED pressure plates under the team's boots. Every approach covered. The first device detonated beneath the lead element. Before the dust cleared, 2 PKM guns opened from opposite flanks. RPGs came in from the rooftops. A perfect 360-degree box. Every exit covered. Position already dialed. That is the false defector, not a firefight that escalated. A trap sprung with precision by an enemy who understood exactly how Americans operate. What happens in the next 90 seconds will cost the team 2 men before anyone fires back. The dust from that first IED is still in the air. Staff. State. Matthew Thompson is down in the alley, ears blown, body thrown hard against the compound wall. He cannot stand. 3 meters away, the team's interpreter is face down and not moving. C. James Clark doesn't wait for the firing to stop. He breaks cover and sprints into the open alley under active PKM fire from 2 directions, reaches the interpreter first, drags him back by his kit. Rounds are hitting the dirt around his boots the entire way. He goes back in. Second sprint. Thompson this time. Clark gets underneath him, hauls him behind the wall, and starts working. Tourniquet, airway, pressure. 90 seconds into the ambush, both men are alive because Clark ran twice through a kill zone, still hot. The team is pinned. Taliban fighters on the rooftops have eyes on every position. The 360-degree box is holding. Clark bought them 90 seconds. Mahoney is about to buy them 10 minutes. Skeet. First. Class. Derek Mahoney doesn't wait for the team to redistribute. He moves to the nearest compound wall, finds a foothold, and pulls himself onto an exposed rooftop while Taliban PKM fire is still raking the courtyard below. No cover. Full 360 exposure. He sets up and starts working. First target. The rooftop shooter controlling the northern lane. 1 round. Then, the fighter angling on Clark's extraction point. 1 round. Between shots, Mahoney is calling his own positions. Below him, M240 teams pivot to the flanking tree line, long suppressive bursts chewing through the wood line, where Taliban reinforcements are funneling in from the east. The combined fire carves a narrow corridor of relative stillness. That stillness is the JTAC's window. Capt. Westbrook is already on the radio. He gives the grid, then he gives the words nobody wants to say out loud. Danger close. Friendlies are still inside the minimum safe distance. He owns that call. The F-16s roll in from the south. First pass. A GBU-38 walks directly into the compound cluster where the Taliban's command element has been directing the encirclement. The detonation doesn't just hit the building, it removes it. The northern PKM position goes silent within the same 60 seconds. Second pass. 20mm strafing along the eastern tree line where the M240 teams had been working for 4 minutes. The encirclement fractures. Taliban fighters pressing in start moving laterally, then backward. The 360-degree trap collapses in under 8 minutes of air-ground coordination. That is the Nangarhar ambush reversed. But when Marines face a kill zone with walls on every side and the ambush triggers before anyone can breathe, that is worse. August 2008, Gulf Company, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, 2-7, rolls into Shewan village on a mounted patrol. Shewan is not a village in any ordinary sense. It is a Taliban logistics hub, a known command node, and every elder in the province knows it. The Marines know it too. What they drive into is geometry designed to kill. High mud brick walls line both sides of the main track. Blind alleys branch left and right, each a funnel. RPG teams are pre-positioned on rooftops before the first MRAP clears the entrance. Taliban fighters have rehearsed this ambush. They know exactly where the kill zone ends. The Marines don't yet. Team Captain is in the turret, hands on the M240, scanning walls that haven't moved. Then everything moves at once. 1 second Captain is scanning the roofline. The next, the MRAP shudders like something hit it with a sledgehammer, and the smoke inside the turret is the color of rust. His right leg is gone below the knee. He doesn't come down from the turret. Captain leans into the M240's spade grips, pivots the barrel toward the nearest muzzle flash, and squeezes. The gun hammers. Spent brass cascades into the turret well. Blood pools on the floor plate beneath him, but the gun keeps talking. He burns through a full ammo can, hosing RPG teams off rooftops and pinning fighters in the alleys below, while his blood pressure drops with every burst. The Marines on the ground hear the M240 firing from the damaged vehicle before they can even see it. That bought them seconds they needed, but seconds run out fast. Taliban reinforcements are already moving down the far tree line, and the JTAC is already on the radio. The JTAC's voice cuts through the radio net flat and fast. 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons from the 421st Expeditionary Fighter are already turning inbound. The pilots have seconds to compute their attack geometry. Below them, Shewan is a maze of compound walls and smoke, Taliban reinforcements streaming down the far tree line toward the surrounded Marine element. The first jet rolls in low and hard. A GBU-12 paveway punches through a compound wall sheltering an RPG cell. The blast wave rolls across the village like a concussion. The second pass comes in strafing. The 20mm cannon tears the reinforcement column apart before it reaches the tree line. Taliban fighters advancing 30 seconds ago are now running. The ones who don't run don't get the chance. That is the moment Shewan flipped from ambush to rout. But the battle isn't finished until someone counts the bodies. When the shooting stopped, the Marines moved through Shewan on foot. What they found was methodical carnage. Bodies in the compound where the GBU-12 hit. Bodies along the tree line where the strafing run caught the reinforcement column mid-sprint. The post-battle AAR assembled the count the way it always does. Corpses physically confirmed by ground teams, cross-referenced against F-16 gun camera footage, weapon caches tallied, fighting positions mapped. The number that came back, more than 50 Taliban killed in action, confirmed on the ground. The official assessment attributed the bulk to the combined weight of Captain M240 fire holding the ambush in place, and the 2 F-16 strike runs collapsing every avenue of reinforcement simultaneously. That is the kill count. That is why Shewan 2008 sits at the top of this list. If that turret gunner fighting on a blown-off leg doesn't settle the debate, nothing will. Drop a comment. Did the F-16 or the M240 decide those fights? One aircraft overhead, one gunner in the dirt. Which one actually broke the Taliban wave?